Before anything was, there was darkness, formless and void, a mess at the feet of our Creator, chaos and chasms, canyons and calloused corners of cosmos too cold and closed to carry creation in its womb. In the beginning, before he said, "Let there be light," before there was life, there was tomb. No corpses yet, but the depths were making room. No such thing as death, and yet there was the closest precursor. Breath, separate and hovering over bodies of water. But God, before he was our Savior, was the author of life, light, and everything right. So then, why, furled into the fabric of the world, do we find wrong? Why, in a garden of good, allow a tree that bears bad fruit to take root and grow? And why the simmer and glow of sin below the surface of Eve's belly? And why bullet, bloodied blunt object in the hand of Cain? And why rain? Why flood? Why allow the mud of human misery trickle down through history? Where is the victory in persecution, the praise and pandemic, the peace, and all this confusion? It seems that your creation crawled back to its beginning. Nothing but darkness round here, nothing but bad news all year, nothing but void, nothing but noise, nothing but empty oceans of breath, nothing but death, nothing but death, nothing but God.
What beautiful words. What a powerful reminder. You know, it's been a crazy season and there's a lot spinning and a lot going on, but we've just been praying and we've been a people saying, but God. But we know our God shows up. We know our God is up to something. If I could, before we go into week 2 of the series, I'd love to share with you a but God moment that we actually experienced a couple weeks ago. I told you how we were going to be distributing $10,000 in grants to local hospitals instead of trying to spend a bunch of money to do a big gathering up for ourselves. Well, one interesting thing that happened, I shared at the very end of last week's broadcast, but I know some of y'all log off early, so I figured I would share it again as we begin the message. As Kim, our office administrator, was making those donations and distributing those grants, she was having trouble actually finding a way to get the money to one of the local hospitals, Mary Immaculate. And so she went online, found the website, made a $2,500 contribution there. And she gets a phone call almost immediately from a lady named Sue. And Sue is on the phone, and she's actually moved to tears thanking Kim for the donation Freedom Life Church made to help them out because, you know, she said it's just been an exhausting time for them. And she asked Kim, she says, Kim, how are you connected here? Do you have a relative who's here or something like that? And they quickly got to talking and realized Kim had actually made a mistake. She had actually made a $2,500 donation to a website of Immaculate Medical Center in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there and this kind of like, uh-oh moment. And so Kim apologized to her and said, I need to call my pastor and figure it out. So she calls me, I call the elders, and we just realized very quickly, maybe God is doing something. I know it seems like Kim made a mistake, but God is bigger than our imagination. And so we prayed about it and we said, you know what? Because of the generosity of our church, we're actually positioned to be able to stretch further than the $10,000. Let's do $12,500, and let's call Sue at Mary Immaculate in Massachusetts, and let's let her know that we're honored to also give them a grant. So that's exactly what I did. I called Sue, and as I shared with her, I said, I'm the senior pastor of Freedom Life, and Kim told me what happened and what's going on, and I just wanted to call to let you know we are honored to also bless you with a grant of $2,500. We'd love for you to keep the money. We're not going to ask you to return it. She began weeping. And then Sue invited me into the story of what's going on up there and how they're in one of the most financially challenged cities in all of the state of Massachusetts, and that they are basically run through a Catholic charity. And through that charity, they have had to stretch as hard as they could in the season since COVID-19 to get things in place and to try to figure out ways to get their folks to have some sense of vibrancy and safety. And that $2,500 was going to go a very long way for the people that are staying there. And so anyway, I just wanted to share with you just a quick testimony that's a result of your generosity. You know, in this storm, in this tension, in this chaos, there's a lot happening. And there's a lot of things that aren't happening sometimes the way we think they should, but God. That's what the heart of this entire series is about. And if I could, I'd love for us to spend our time today looking at a but God moment in the life of somebody that we're very familiar with. The Bible tells us a lot about a guy named King David. And it tells us about him from his childhood. And we're going to kind of go back to that. But where we're going to start today, I would love to invite us into this unbelievable circumstance that David finds himself in. My message today is God meets us in unbelievable circumstances. And so if we could look at the but God moment here, David is in a really bad spot. And God reveals himself to him in a brand new way. And later, David actually writes a worship song. You know, earlier we were singing worship songs. Well, when you read the book of Psalms, what you're reading are worship songs and poetry that was written as a result of things that God did for people. And in this particular one, we're going to read Psalm 34, and I'm going to read it from the Message. I have it on the screen here for you if you want to follow along. Psalm 34, we're going to read verses 1 through 18. And this is actually the lyrics of a song that David wrote in response to God showing up in one of the scariest, most unbelievable circumstances of his entire life. Check this out. He says, I bless God every chance I get. My lungs expand with his praise. I live and breathe God. If things aren't going well, hear this and be happy. Join me in spreading the news. Together, let's get the word out. God met me more than halfway. He freed me from my anxious fears. Look at him and give him your warmest smile. Never hide your feelings from him. When I was desperate, I called out, and God got me out of a tight spot. God's angels set up a circle of protection around us while we pray. Open your mouth and taste. Open your eyes and see how good God is. Blessed are you who run to him. Worship God if you want what's best. Worship opens doors to all his goodness. Young lions on the prowl get hungry, but God seekers are full of God. Come, children, listen closely. I'll give you a lesson in God worship. Who out there has a lust for life? Can't wait for each day to come upon beauty. Guard your tongue from profanity. And no more lying through your teeth. Turn your back on sin. Do something good. Embrace peace and don't let it get away. I love that line. God keeps an eye on his friends. His ears pick up every moan and groan. God won't put up with rebels. He'll cut them out from the pack. But is anyone crying for help? God is listening, ready to rescue you. If your heart is broken, you'll find God right there. If you're kicked in the gut, he'll help you catch your breath. I don't know if you've ever been kicked in the gut, or maybe this whole quarantine thing has caused some shift in your life, and maybe you're feeling like, man, I'm really struggling just to get through the day. Can I tell you that I believe God has a word for you right now? You see, David wrote that psalm at a time in his life that he would not have picked for himself. The irony is that David was doing everything God wanted him to do. David was chosen by God as a child. You see, God told the prophet Samuel to go to Jesse's house, and I'm just going to give you a quick backstory. When David was still a child, and so he went to his house, and God told the prophet Samuel to anoint him as the future king of Israel. The problem with this is that Israel already had a king, and his name was Saul. But that wasn't God's pick. That was man's pick. David was God's pick. So we find David in the Bible as a child. And he's anointed by Samuel the prophet. And then as he grows up, he begins to serve in King Saul's court. He can play the harp. And Saul's tormented by this evil spirit. And so they send for this young man named David that God has anointed to be king out at the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. And this kid shows up with a harp. And he begins to play for King Saul. And it alleviates the evil spirit. As this continues, he now is going back and forth from the palace to his home to help continue to tend to his father's sheep. And on one of these trips back towards the palace, he hears about this Philistine army that has invaded Israel. And now the army of the people of God are facing a giant, and his name is Goliath. And David inquires, he says, what's to happen for the person that would get rid of this stain in the face of Israel, this horrible Philistine that he would insult the armies of the living God. And his brothers actually pick on him and kind of dismiss him. But he says, no, I want to know. And they said, well, the king's promised that whoever would get rid of this giant Goliath would actually get to marry one of his daughters and would never have to pay taxes the rest of his life. I don't know how many of you guys would like that deal. But here's David, and we don't know exactly how old he is. Some think 15, 16, some think early 20s. But we know this. We know that he was being faithful to God, and he couldn't stand this giant standing in front of the armies of the living God, insulting the people of God. So he bravely asked for the opportunity to face Goliath. And you've probably heard the story, but he slays Goliath with a rock, and he takes Goliath's sword and he chops Goliath's head off with his own sword. And all of a sudden, he kind of rises to stardom very quickly. And in the midst of all of this, King Saul's like, okay, who are you? He's like, I'm David from Jesse's house. And he says, I want you to come live in my palace. And he actually becomes one of the king's armor bearers. And he becomes part of kind of the rhythm of the king's life. And he's there serving King Saul. But all of a sudden, David starts getting more popular than Saul. And people are singing these songs about David's conquest and battle and how Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And now the very king that he is serving is threatened by him. And this whole time, you got to remember, this whole time, he's being obedient to God. And so the king doesn't know what to do with them because he's so popular. So the king puts him in charge of 1,000 men and he says, I want you to go out and I want you to fight all the Philistines you can, hoping that he will die at the hands of the Philistines. The problem is that God's hand is on David. And because God's hand is on David, he wins battle after battle after battle, and his popularity grows and grows and grows, and King Saul's insecurity towards him gets worse and worse and worse. So then he comes up with this plan. He says, okay, here's what we're going to do. David, I want you to go on a special mission. And I want you to do, and he gives them some crazy marching orders, hoping that that will actually lead to his death. And he says, and if you can accomplish this secret mission, then I will give you my daughter Michal in marriage. Not only does David accomplish it, he comes back having accomplished twice as much as the king asked. So now he's finding himself married to the daughter of the king who's trying to kill him. Really complex situation. I don't know what kind of family problems you've got, but let's just say this is a really hard spot to be in. So now he's married to the king's daughter. The king wants to kill him, and the king finally says, hey, listen, I'm going to kill David. I don't know what to do with him. I don't know how, but I don't want him around. The problem with this is he shares that with his son, Jonathan. Jonathan has become very close friends with David. In fact, the Bible tells us they were closer than brothers. So Jonathan warns David, and David's like, nah, I mean, I've been doing all this good stuff for the king, and he doesn't want to kill me. But it persists. He tries to get assassins to do it, and it all falls through. And finally, Michal hears about her father sending people to the house that night. And so she says, David, you have to leave. And so David sneaks out, and sure enough, it turns out he has to run. And he goes and he finds Samuel the prophet in Ramah, where he's staying, and Samuel protects him, and he's like, the king's trying to kill me, and I don't know why. All I've ever done is exactly what the king asked me to do, and what God's asked me to do. Why are these bad things happening? I don't know if you've ever found yourself trying to be obedient to God, doing what he asks, serving him, and just as things seem to start going good, something changes the entire world, and you find yourself wondering what's going on. Well, I would encourage you, David has something to say for us about this. Samuel looks out for him, and after that, Saul goes to get him. He sends men, and they get to where the prophet is, and God's spirit is so heavy on Samuel and the prophets that the guards that are trying to arrest David start prophesying themselves. They start having church. They come back, they're like, we couldn't arrest him because we got too caught up having church. So Saul goes himself, and the same things happen. And so finally, he's like, all right, I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to kill this guy. David hears that now the king is actually hunting him down. So he leaves Ramah and he goes down to a little town called Nob. In Nob, he finds the house of this priest. And this is a little spot between Israel and Philistine. And he goes into this house, and he's scared, he's afraid, he's alone, he's betrayed. He was doing everything God told him to do, but now he's being chased by the king himself. And he says, hey, man, do you have any food? I'm on a secret mission for the king. And he's like, well, we've got some bread. And he says, cool. He says, do you have any weapons? I left so quickly on a secret mission that I don't even have a weapon. He says, well, we do have one weapon. And I want you to see, because this is pretty profound. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 8 and 9. David asked him, the priest, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my own sword or any other weapons because the king's mission was so urgent. And look at what the priest says. The priest replied, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, who you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. And look at what David says. David said, there is none like it. Give it to me. Why was there no sword like that sword? Because that sword was a reminder of before all the stuff started spinning out of control, when David knew that he was empowered by God to face an insurmountable obstacle named Goliath. It reminded David of all the swords on earth, of all the places on earth, for David to end up at the place that was a reminder of when God showed up in an unsurmountable circumstance and did what only he could do. That sword was a reminder of that moment. I don't know what Goliath's sword looks like in your life right now. But a lot of times when things are getting crazy, especially when we're trying to do what God told us to do, if you look for it, there are things where God will remind us, hey, you've been here before, and I was with you. You see, my first point, if you're a note taker, is that we serve a faithful king, but we live in a fallen world. David was doing what the king asked him to do. You see, our king, he's above any earthly king. And sometimes we don't understand what's going on with our government. We don't understand what's going on with our global economy or with our world circumstances. But our king is above every kingdom on earth. Our king is able to minister to us through the brokenness of humanity. But the truth is, humanity is broken. I know that, if you're like me, been trying to navigate this every day. There's a new challenge. There's different learning. There's this quarantine is not fun. And in some ways, what we've begun to discover is people are having some really strange reactions to it. I'm still trying to figure out why there's no toilet paper. I'm truly trying to understand that. Think about that. I have been studying, as much as I need to about this, and I understand that COVID-19 affects your respiratory issues, your lungs, and your breathing, and things like that. Maybe, make sure you keep your hands clean. So I can imagine there being a shortage of cough suppressants. I can imagine there being a shortage of tissues. I can imagine a shortage of hand sanitizers and soap. But toilet paper, what does buying toilet paper have to do with COVID-19? You see, sometimes when the world spins, we do things that don't make sense. And then we get quarantine crazy. Have you experienced any of the quarantine craze yet? You can just spend hours, I wouldn't, but you could spend hours online just watching video after video after video of stuff people are doing as a result of just being stuck at home. I actually found a little compilation video. And I want to just show you this video if I could real quick. This video is basically the Watermelon Challenge compilation. You put rubber bands on a watermelon, and you just keep putting them on there. It floats. Look, here's another, this guy. So they already got it kind of started. That's an easy way to ruin a great camera right there. Let's look at this one more here. Check this out. And kids, I am not saying this will be your art and craft for the day. So parents, go ahead and look at your kids and say no. But this is a typical dad. The kids are, they're trying. Dad, no, let me show you, kids. Let me fix it for you. Yeah, let me show you right about now how to. Oh, okay. You can stop. You should stop that because I could spend hours watching that, and I do have a sermon I have to preach. But this kind of stuff, what does that have to do with the situation? Well, nothing, but we're getting stir crazy. Sometimes in a irrational circumstance, we just do stuff we don't normally do. What does that have to do with King David? Well, I want to talk about what David does. You see, when David leaves the priest's home, he has a decision to make. I can't go back to where I was. I've got a weapon, but I don't know where to go. And of all the places on the planet Earth to go, I want us to pick up the story with where David chose to go and try to hide. He's like, where could I blend in? Where could I go that I won't be recognized, that I could just kind of lay low for a while? But let's actually look at what he decides to do. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 10. That day, David fled from Saul and went to Ashish. I guess that's how you say it, or just sneeze. Well, don't sneeze nowadays, because anyway. But he went to the king of Gath. So he decides, I'm going to go seek refuge in Gath. There's a problem with that. And the problem is this, that this happens to be the hometown of one famous person in David's past. The problem with Gath is that there was one particular person from Gath that makes it a little difficult to hide out there. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, was the one who was taunting the Philistines. So do you remember that sword that he picked up? Of all the swords that he could find, he happened to have Goliath's swords with him. His sword with him. And David was the one who had killed and beheaded Goliath. And for some strange reason, he decides, where can I hide out with this really huge sword that I won't be noticed? I know, I'll go to Gath. That makes no sense. Like, that is the worst place to go. He's got a sword that's too big to hide. And he's trying to go somewhere he can lay low, so he decides to go to the hometown of the hero of the army that he has been destroying for the past couple of years. Let's just see how this worked out. I don't know why he chose to go there, but here's my second point. Irrational circumstances will lead us to do irrational things. COVID-19, let's buy toilet paper. Irrational. We're stuck at home. Let's blow up watermelons. Irrational, right? Those are funny things. But here's something very real. Man, I'm desperate to rescue myself. I'm being pursued by the king, and I don't even know why, but I'm scared right now. I found a weapon. I know I should go to the hometown of the guy whose head I chopped off to take the sword from, whose army I have been destroying for the past year. That doesn't make sense. I don't know why David thought he was going to get refuge there, but this is what actually happens. Let's go to verse 11 through 15. It says, but the servants of the king said to him, isn't this David? Like, they notice him immediately. Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of, I don't know how to say his name, so somebody can Google it and put it in the chat. But the king of Gath. All of a sudden, he's like, man, I had this plan. I thought maybe I could get refuge here. Maybe I could just blend in, whatever. So then look at what he decides to do. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gates and letting saliva run down his beard, which is a big deal for those of us who have beards. We understand. Anyway, moving. She said to his servants, look at the man. He's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on? And like this in front of me, must this man come into my house? So David, for whatever reason, thought, I'm going to go to the hometown of my enemy, and I'm going to just try to blend in there. He's noticed immediately. The king is like, dude, yeah, arrest him. And he just decides if he acts crazy enough, maybe they will let him live. And so that's what he does. He puts on a show, and he just starts acting crazy. And he actually gets himself out of this. He's able to leave. It works. And I don't know if the king didn't believe it was David. I don't really know why. But the king is like, dude, just get this guy out of here. You see, at that time, if someone was mentally insane, they were believed to be possessed by a demon. And so basically the king of Gath is like, I don't need any demons around here. Get this person out of here. And David flees. He exits. And that's actually this journey and the sequence of events right after this are what led him to write Psalm 34, where we started. So I hope that gives you a little bit of thought around this. But I want to actually, if we could, ask ourselves, why did he go to Gath? I have a couple of theories. Maybe it was just completely like out of fear, like anywhere is better than Israel. Maybe he was drawing on old victory in a time of new battle. Maybe he decided to go to Gath because it was only 3 miles from where he had had his greatest victory as an individual. You see, after Saul enlisted him, he had had many victories with an army. But now David doesn't have an army. So maybe finding that sword reminded him of victory when it was just him and God. And maybe for some reason he decided to go to an old battle for a new victory. And maybe what he discovered in going back to an old battle was that it wasn't a new victory awaiting because he was fighting something that God had already delivered him from before. I don't know about you, but for me, in this season of quarantine, I have found myself fighting old battles. I've been very open with you guys about my weight loss journey and about, just how that's been better for me at times and other times. And I'm just going to be honest with you. Apparently for me, shelter in home means eat chips and bagels and ditch your eating habits, because that's exactly what happened. And I'm telling you, I have put on, I didn't put on the quarantine 15, but I put on the quarantine 8 or 9. And I said, listen, that's it. Why am I going back to eating for comfort? This is me, and this is my journey. I'm not speaking to anybody else about what your struggles might be, but I just want to be vulnerable with you. That I had to call my coach a couple of weeks ago, my nutrition coach, and I had to confess to him, hey man, I have just ditched this thing, and it's not working out well for me. I'm not experiencing my goals. I'm actually taking a step backwards. Why am I going backwards instead of forwards? Because sometimes in irrational situations, we do irrational things. And for me, I actually took a really big step backwards in my journey in eating for health, not pleasure. And so I had to bring confession, and I had to say, you know what? I want to choose righteousness. And for me, that's the addiction that is lingering. And I've got to be vulnerable about that if I'm going to defeat it. And so I just want to encourage you, if you found yourself struggling with old things, you're not alone. I'm glad to say now, since I've made that choice, it's been a little bit now, and I've actually kind of lost another 2 pounds again, and I'm on the right journey back. What has it been like for you? Maybe for you, it's something about marriage, and things were hitting a great stride, and now this has compressed all that. And can I tell you, but God can show up for you too. Maybe it's been finances, and you were just getting out of debt, or you're just getting towards your goals, and then you've been furloughed or laid off. Can I tell you that it might look bad, but God shows up in unbelievable circumstances. Maybe for you, it's being at home with your parents all day and missing your senior year of high school or your 8th grade year of middle school or half a semester of college. And just as you were hitting your stride, everything shifted. You might feel very discouraged by that, but God still has a plan for your future. And he still has his hand on your future. If I could kind of pick up the story and see how this journey ends for David, let's go to 1 Samuel 22, verse 1 and 2. David left Gath and escaped to the caves of Adullam. When his brother and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. Now I want you to see what happens next. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with them. I don't know if you just caught what just happened, but David is in the worst, scariest moment of his life, and he's on the run and doesn't know a way out. He finds himself in a cave, in isolation, in the pit, and his family members show up. They hear about his distress, and they show up. Can I tell you, that's what's been happening with our church. I've been so proud of you as a church as I hear about a need and people are lined up ready to go help meet that need. As I hear about someone who's lost their job, and then I hear about other people blessing them. As I hear about someone who's gone to the hospital and we're praying for them, and then I get a phone call that they're healed and that they're now out. They're off the ventilator. They're off the respirator because the prayer of the saints. Guys, I'm telling you, when you find yourself in a cave, don't be surprised when family shows up. Sometimes it just has to be known. And as I think about that, I think about who joined him. It was all in distress and debt and discontented. You know, we're in a season where we could feel very much by ourselves. But what we might realize is there are others who are kind of in a tough spot too. And if we can come together in this, we'll find ourselves stronger together. My third point is this, that God meets us in unbelievable circumstances and shows us unbelievable things about himself and others. I don't know about you, but I'm not just learning about myself. I'm not just learning about God. I'm actually learning about community in a new way. I'm learning about the power of the church when we can't gather, but we can be sent. I'm reimagining what it looks like for the future to be a church that is actually being watched in 11 countries, in 54 states and principalities around the world, and I don't know how many languages, by over 2,000 households gathering together virtually and being an expression of the kingdom regionally. I don't know about you, but I've never had an imagination for that. I never thought that this church at 2200 Coliseum Drive could have God breathe on it like that and mobilize us through what seems like crisis and turn it into an unbelievable expression of his kingdom. You know, part of what God really messed with me about in all this was this journey. And if I could summarize everything that we've talked about by just thinking through this again. Because some of us are in a journey and we can't yet understand how God could use something so drastic for his glory. But if we could, I'd love to just kind of recap this, because I think it would be fair to say David could have been a little bit bitter at the fact that he was honoring God this whole time. He had been anointed by God. He didn't ask, he was chosen. He was serving King Saul. And through this entire journey, there was a relentlessness about the battle coming against him. But if I could, one of the cool things about the perspective we get is we get to see how the stories end. Eventually, Saul died and David did become the king. And God used those men that he met in the cave to become his mighty men, his generals, his warriors. And throughout David's reign as king, he made mistakes and he repented and God used him. But it was the people he connected with in the cave that became the closest people in his journey. Those who joined him at his hardest moment, he positioned alongside him when he rose to power. I would love to encourage you that maybe what you've been feeling like isolation could turn into a time when you find community like you never have before. And if I could just briefly recap, there's more to the story, right? But God brings more to the story. To summarize the story we talked about, God anointed David to be king in a world while a different ruler was in power. In order for him to fulfill his mission, he had to leave his father's household. Then he begins a journey of defeating every enemy of God's people everywhere he goes, until finally the earthly ruler seeks to have him killed. I'm going to read that again. David, God's anointed king, is anointed to be king of a world with a different ruler. In order to fulfill his mission, he must leave his father's house. And as he leaves his father's house, he begins to confront the armies of the enemies of God and defeats them everywhere he shows up. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Well, let's go a little further with it, because if you remember the story, when his life is in danger, where did he flee? When in the worst moment of his journey, he fled to this place called Ramah. And Ramah means hill. So he goes to the hill. So he goes to the hill, and the prophet Samuel protects him. But he goes from Ramah, the hill, to Nov, which means the high place. And it's at Nov where the priest actually feeds him and arms him. And he goes from there to Gath. And this is where it's really interesting because Gath, the word Gath literally means wine press, the place of the pressing. And he goes from there to a cave. And as I was looking up the Hebrew word for cave there, it actually means a dark cavern or a pit. And it's from the root Hebrew, which means laid bare, naked, stripped. To be utterly humiliated and exposed in the deep darkness of a cavern. And if you want to go a little further than that, Adullam, where that cave was, it actually means justice of the people. I want you to think about that. In this place that means justice of the people, David establishes an army of warriors from a group of people who were indebted, distressed, discontented, as they sought him. And when he came out of that cave, he came out with a military that had been trained in the depth. So if we want to play that a different way, let's think about another king that God chose, that he sent to the earth while there was another ruler in power who had to leave his father's household in order to accomplish his mission. And as our King Jesus showed up, he defied and defeated every enemy that he confronted of the people of God for 3 years before the earthly powers tried to have him killed. And from that moment, he goes to the safe place, the mount, the hill, the Mount of Olives. Not just the Mount of Olives, but he goes into the garden, to the place where angels ministered strength to him, where they equipped him for the journey. And in the garden, not just any garden, but the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane literally means the place of the pressing. And it was our King Jesus who stepped into our planet from his Father's house to defy the armies of evil against us, who then goes from there up the hill into the garden in the place of the pressing to confront the power of darkness forever. He makes it from there to the cross, from the cross to the depths of the darkness, utterly stripped of dignity, humanity, clothing. He is mistreated, yet he descends to the pit of hell itself. He descends to darkness itself. And he ascends on the third day. And when he comes out of that cave, he is now equipped to get a people to become an army. So if you are feeling like someone who's in distress or in debt or discontented, can I tell you that we serve a king who went to the pit so that you and I could meet him in ours. And we could come out of that pit equipped to be part of his army on earth as it is in heaven for such a time as this, to not shrink back, but to move forward as the people of God and say there's battles to be fought, there are souls to be saved, and I get to be part of the army of God right here, right now. I'm not in this alone. I'm not in this by myself. I am surrounded, and I will walk in victory with my family. Maybe this is a time for you to choose to meet the king who went to the pit for you so you could be free. If that's you right now, I invite you just to click that button. I'd like to accept Christ today. Right now. You don't, just right now. Maybe for you, you know you've already met your king, but today is about what's next. Maybe you're looking for a tribe. Could I invite you? We are a global tribe. We are virtually connecting right now all around the globe, and all around our FLC Hampton, FLC San Antonio, FLC Online. And when I'm done preaching, there's gonna be a video that shares with you all the ways you can get connected right now with other people who are in the same journey from anywhere in the globe. if you feel like I would like to be known here at Freedom Life and I would like to be a part of this community, I'm actually going to invite you just to do something right now. I'm going to invite you to sign up for Freedom 101. I have here my phone, and I'm just going to show you how simple this is. So I'm going to hold my phone up here, and if you go to flchampton.com and you click on Freedom 101, it is right here. Freedom 101, sign up here. Fill that out, and that will register you to join my wife and I next Sunday as we share with you the heart of our church and what it looks like to become more connected to this family. Hey, I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to hear from folks from San Antonio, Hampton, and online about how you and I can get more connected. I pray that whatever God's put in your heart right now, that you actually take the step. Lord, I just ask in Jesus' name right now that we as a people would respond to your word. I thank you for a right now word like this from King David's life. I thank you, God, that in unbelievable circumstances, you show up in unbelievable ways. May none of us find ourselves alone. In Jesus' name, amen.